Hey besties, welcome to Ella Grace's vlogs. I'm Ella Grace and this is my co-host Mocha Bean. He doesn't have a comment at this time. Anyways, you guys might know me from my collab here on YouTube with Tiny House Giant Journey or from the Instagram or Facebook reel with Tiny House Giant Journey. They both got over 1 million views, which is kind of crazy. And you also might know me from my TikTok where I post just silly little lifestyle content, I guess you could say, and my tiny house has gone viral on TikTok a few times. So that's where you might know me from. But anyways, I get a lot of questions, DMs, comments, emails even about my tiny house journey, how I got into my tiny house, how I built it out, all of that stuff. So I figured today I would come and give you guys a little pros and cons list, or I guess just have like a conversation about the pros and cons of living in a tiny house, why I like living in a tiny house, and all that jazz. So with that out of the way, let's get started. And I know that I'm a small creator and you might not have ever seen me before, but you should subscribe because like I said, I'm trying to post more consistently. A little bit of background about me. Hi, my name is Ella Grace. Like I said, I live right outside of Asheville, North Carolina in the wonderful mountains of Western North Carolina. I love it here. I love the mountains. I love Asheville. It's such a cutie little place, even though I don't live directly in the city. I do live right next to my parents, which is great. I love living next to my mommy and daddy, and I share a driveway with them. So that's pretty awesome. And I live my tiny house is, I call it my tiny farmhouse because it sits right next to a barn and a cow pasture, and it's up here on a hill kind of away from everybody. So I just like to call it my tiny farmhouse because that's what it is. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm in real estate school. I don't know if that's relevant information to anybody, but my goal is to be a real estate agent. So I have a huge love of talking about this topic when it comes to tiny homes, why I love them. So that's just a little bit about me. So let's get into like my actual tiny house pros and cons, a little bit about the story of how I ended up in the tiny house. So the first thing I would like to get out of the way, and the first thing I would like to mention, is that I do not own this tiny house. I rent the tiny house, okay? Hear me loud and clear. I do not own it. I rent it. I did not build it out. I did not make any of the decisions concerning the interior of the interior design of the tiny house. None of that involved me. It was built by family friends of ours who I rent it from, and they are my landlords. So just to get that out of the way, I cannot answer any of your questions about build costs or dimensions or where I got certain things, yada yada. I cannot answer those questions because I did not build it out. So there's that little piece of information for you. I do live right next to my parents. I do share a driveway with them, but like I said, we do not own this tiny house. All right, it is not on my family's land. They're not paying for me to live here. That's just the reality of it. So getting into more of the like pros and cons, and I guess we'll talk about the pros first, obviously, of tiny home living. I'm going to be talking about it kind of as a whole and relating it to my personal experience because I do have a lot of knowledge in this field from my research that I have personally done. But for me, the biggest pro, and I guess I would say for most people, the biggest pro when it comes to tiny home living is the cost. So the median rent price in my area to rent an normal apartment is $1,800 to $2,200 a month. I don't know who's affording that, but it ain't me. That is astronomical. Any average working class American cannot afford that unless you are making six figures and you're got a big girl job or something, which I do not have. My rent is obviously significantly cheaper. My rent is $1,200 a month, which I know is a lot to some people. And the first thing I would like to say about that is long gone are the days where we were paying $600-700 in rent. Those days are long gone. Okay. It does not matter where in the country you're living, you're gonna be paying about $1,000 for rent. Like, hate to break it to you, I got a lot of people calling me out of touch for saying that my rent is cheap for being $1,200. That is cheap. That is cheap in this day and age. So I would just like to preface. But the other reason why I consider my rent cheap is because this is just for me personally. I cannot speak for all landlords who rent out tiny homes, but all of my utilities are included. That includes Wi-Fi, electric, water, trash, all of that is included. So I have just one fixed expense every month, and that makes a huge difference because, you know, on top of that $1,800 that you're going to have to pay in rent, you also are having to pay utilities. A lot of apartment complexes charge for parking. Parking. You have to pay to park where you live. Like, that's just insane to me. So that's why my rent, I consider it cheap, of great price, especially in my area. You aren't going to find anything for less than that. So that's just the preface, is the cost. Another reason why I would consider tiny homes more cost effective is, number one, you are going to be using less utilities. So even if you were to build one out yourself and you did, you know, have a utility bill, your utility bill is going to be significantly less than a normal apartment or house. So that's another pro to think about. The other big cost factor is when you are tiny home living, the need to fill the space with unnecessary junk is basically revoked because you have a small space. You can't fill it with unnecessary junk. You can't just go out and buy random pieces of furniture or random pieces of decor with the hopes of making somewhere work. Like, you don't, it takes a lot of that pressure off. I personally bought almost nothing for this tiny house. It did come with a few pieces of furniture, but the only thing I bought was a bookshelf, and I didn't even need that. I just wanted it. So there's no need to fill it with unnecessary junk. I just moved right in with all of the stuff that was like in my bedroom or left over in boxes from when I moved out of my apartment. So no unnecessary junk that you're needing to fill it with. You don't have to buy a ton of decor because you have a small space to decorate. So that would be probably the biggest pro, is definitely the cost. A lot of that also is factored in because I do live alone, so I'm not having to pay. I'm only having to feed myself and my dog. Since I live alone, that also factors in to a lot of that. The next pro that I would say, this is definitely my biggest reason for loving tiny home living, is it allows me to live independently. Living independently is something that is very important to me. I'm a very independent person. I strive for independence. I love working and making my own money. So having my own space, living independently was super important to me. So that's kind of why I chose to move out on my own at such a young age. People make comments all the time about how young I am to be living on my own, and I would just like to say, so what? Getting to make my own schedule, live my own lifestyle because I live alone is super important to me. And you don't have to live in a tiny house to live alone, obviously, but for me, it's just easier that way. More pros and cons. These are going to be more just like tiny homes as a whole than my personal experience. Is they're actually a fantastic way to earn passive income. If you're somebody who can afford to build out a few of them, have some land to put them on, they would generate a great passive income. I mean, my landlords, they're awesome. They obviously are making passive income off this. You could build one, live in it for a few months, and then rent that sucker out because it's cheaper. It's cheap to do that. And there's actually a lot of tiny home communities that are like that are popping up everywhere. I get a lot of questions on why I chose the tiny home route as opposed to like a mobile home route or a manufactured home route. And mobile homes and tiny homes are around the same price point. So I feel like a lot of people kind of confuse the two. And I want to explain why a tiny home for me would be a better option than a manufactured home. And the biggest reason why, if you were going to invest in one or the other, I would say go for the tiny home option, is because they hold their value. They do not depreciate as fast. A tiny home can be sitting on your property for 5-10 years, and as long as you're taking good care of it, it can still hold the same value or more value from when you originally purchased it or built it out, since they are built out like a house. Manufactured homes usually depreciate within 5-10 years, and you are never ever going to get a return on your investment in a mobile home as opposed to a tiny house. Another cost, or I guess economic factor, you would have to check your local laws, but here locally in North Carolina, if you put your tiny home on a trailer frame and make it mobile, meaning it has like wheels, or you wheeled it in there, you don't have to pay property taxes. The property taxes like that you would have to pay on your normal home are kind of just gone. I mean, obviously you're going to have to pay some taxes, but property taxes don't exist if it's sitting on a trailer frame, because then it's considered more of like an RV structure or like a camper style structure. So that's another huge pro. If I were to choose between one or the other, a mobile or manufactured home, or a tiny house, I'm gonna choose the tiny house. It might have less space. It might not be as appealing at the time because they're so much smaller, but the value holds. I would much rather have the confidence that my house isn't going to lose half its value in 5-10 years. That's just me personally. This is also no hate to mobile homes whatsoever. I have seen some beautiful manufactured homes, and a house is a house, okay? A home is a home. It does not matter what kind of home you have. So let me just get that little disclaimer out of the way. It's like kind of moving away from the cost side of things. The next pro for me is I I'm a very clean, organized person when it comes to my living space. I like to keep it pretty clean and organized, and I can get this entire tiny home deep clean, top to bottom, in less than an hour. Mop the floors, vacuum, all of the things, wipe all the surfaces. I can get this sucker clean in under an hour. I mean, that's depending on how messy you are, but I can get it clean pretty fast. So that was definitely a huge pro for me, is like I said, how easy how easy it is to clean. One question I get all the time is storage and the difference between living in a regular house and like the storage, all of that kind of stuff, like how I fit all my junk in here. And I will tell you, I was so nervous to move in here because I had all of my stuff that was packed up from my apartment. I was nervous I was not going to have room for all of it. And I'm here to tell you that it actually shocked me how much room I have in this little house. I didn't really need any extra storage. My closet space, I feel like I have plenty of closet space. I have a dresser, so I'd never really worry about clothing storage. And another huge pro for me is I have a loft up here, and this loft kind of also acts, it's like my secondary storage space where I can just put like random junk that I don't want out on the floor. But I've never had an issue with storage, and there's a lot of, ways you can go about that. It's just never been an issue for me. I have an ottoman here that also doubles as my coffee table, which stores things like blankets. And then in the bathroom, there's like a cubicle that has lots of storage in it. My kitchen has plenty enough storage. I don't have any trouble fitting my dishes or anything in there. So storage is just not an issue for me. I moved in with all of the stuff that I had and had room. So the next thing that I would say would be the biggest pro to a tiny home is the customability. You can customize tiny homes to be basically whatever you want them to be. You can build them out to your needs. You can make it as small or as big as you want. I have seen some tiny homes that are almost 1,300 square feet, which is insane. You can really customize it, make it fit to your needs, because it is a lot cheaper than building out a regular house. I've gotten most of the pros out of the way. I just, rambled on. But I'm going to talk about a few of the cons of living in a tiny house, because I feel like it wouldn't be fair if I didn't give you a few of the cons. The biggest con for me, I would say, would definitely be the lack of like entertainment space. Now, don't let me fool you. I've had like 10 girls in this place at one time. We were all sitting down comfortably, had plenty of space. But there is a lack of like entertainment space. Like I can't just be having a ton of people over here for dinner. I don't have like a dining table. So I just, there's no entertainment space really. I mean, my living room works great. So that would probably be one of the bigger cons. And the other con that I would say, again, this would be totally dependent on your specific tiny house, but mine is open concept, so I don't have like a separate bedroom space. And the only reason why that's a con is if I were to be living with another person, we would have no privacy. So that's just another thing to think about. Like, I could not imagine having a roommate. Obviously, if you're married, that's a different story. But I could not imagine having a roommate in my tiny house personally, because there's no privacy. And, like, you have to go in the bathroom to change your clothes. Or whatnot. So there's no, for me personally, since I'm living alone, it's not really that big of an issue. But if I were to be living with another person, there would just be no privacy. Honestly, those might be my only cons. I really can't think of any other cons. I love talking about my tiny house. I love my tiny house. I love renting my tiny house because, like I said, I do rent, I do not own. So if you guys have any questions, any more questions for me, please let me know. I'm always happy. My DMs are always open as long as I see them. But yeah, that's just a little bit about the pros and cons of living in a tiny home. I hope you consider it if you are considering other living options, as opposed to the regular apartment. I highly encourage you to look into tiny homes, and I also highly encourage you to build your own because, like I said, there's so many pros to building and having your own and all that. So anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Can't wait for the next episode.